Earlier this week, I was just messing around in the spaceplane hangar in Kerbal Space Program when, all of a sudden, I was interrupted by...
On a lonely planet slowly spinning its way to damnation, amid the incompetence and unpreparedness of lesser space programs, one team stands resilient against the herds, putting their lives on the line to aid those who are previously unaware of the quick save option. Yes, it's the incredible adventures of Jebediah and his crack team of Kerbinauts. They are the Blunderbirds, saving the Kerbin race one stranded explorer at a time.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Blunderbirds, in which I'm going to be doing 3 of my favourite things to do in Kerbal Space Program, and that is performing rescue missions. I don't know, there's something so satisfying about visiting the surface of another planet or moon that isn't for the sole purpose of, planting a flag and getting science. Oh my goodness, I just realised I forgot to plant a flag in this mission. Spoiler alert. Oh well, anyway, yes, it's nice to visit the surface of a different planet or moon, not just to plant a flag, but to actually do something. And, options are very limited in Kerbal Space Program, but rescue missions is definitely one of the more fun things that you can do. The second of my 3 favourite things I'm going to be doing in this video is probably obvious by now, and that is I'm going to be flying in SSTO. I used to do SSTOs all the time. I feel like it was the main... Well, if people always said that I build too many SSTOs, but actually they've never actually been the majority of my missions, but they made up a sizable chunk of my content on this channel. I think when KSP2 came around and suddenly SSTOs were just not as fun because hydrogen fuel was so big, and so you couldn't really make aesthetically good-looking SSTOs, my enthusiasm for them was sort of killed. But obviously now KSP2 is behind us for now. SSTOs are back on the table, so I thought let's fly another SSTO. And my third thing that I like doing in Kerbal Space Program is visiting Gilly. I genuinely believe it is one of the most underrated places to visit in the stock Kerbal system, just because it seems kind of boring on the surface of things, but I think it's a really good place for kind of beginners to sort of hone their interplanetary skills, because little known fact, it doesn't actually take that much delta V to reach. Essentially, if you have a rocket, or in this case an SSTO, that can do a Mun landing, then you have a rocket or SSTO that can do a Gilly landing. It takes essentially the same amount of delta V. Of course, a lot more delta V is needed to reach Gilly, but then its surface gravity is so tiny that it kind of all balances out. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be rescuing a random Goy's stranded Kerbal, Bob Kerman, who he stranded on Gilly and then, in his words, could not be bothered to go and rescue. So I thought I'd just do that job for him, because Bob Kerman is one of the better of the 4 OG Kerbals, because he's the scientist, so he can reset the Mystery Goo and the Science Junior, and so he's just a very useful Kerbal to have for kind of the early career mode / early science mode playthroughs. Anyway, we have constructed the SSTO. Now we're in the tracking station, time warping to an optimum Kerbin to Eve transfer window. So the optimum Kerbin to Eve transfer window is Eve needs to be 54.1 degrees behind Kerbin, unlike all the other planets which need to be ahead of Kerbin. I didn't use a proper tool, I just eyeballed it. I'd recommend using a proper tool if you're new to interplanetary Kerbal Space Program missions, but it's a lot of effort in it. I just couldn't be bothered. So I eyeballed it and it turned out alright. So is there a moral to this story? Who knows? If there is a moral to this video, though, it is, I don't know if moral is the right word, but if there is a lesson to be learned from this video, is that you need to install Waterfall if you haven't already, because my goodness, those engine effects are great. Despite being broken, I completely forgot that my install of Waterfall is balked. I'm not sure why. It's not too bad with the rapiers firing in open cycle mode, so they're using the air to supply the oxidizer for their combustion. But when they go to closed cycle mode and start using, liquid oxygen, we'll get this weird graphical glitch where the plumes will just turn into solid pink bars. I've made a note of this. I've written... I have I was recently sponsored by Hover Pens, and so now I have nice Hover Pens on my desk. I have access to pens at the ready. So I've written a post-it note saying reinstall Waterfall before your next video. So I swear that I will fix the rapiers for future missions. But for now, I must apologise. I think the plumes are starting a little bit too far behind the engines there, and when we go to closed cycle mode, it all goes wrong. But one upside to this graphical glitch is that you can actually see visually more clearly when the rapiers switch to closed cycle mode. So maybe I shouldn't reinstall Waterfall. And so when I'm going on some random tangent about something that isn't relevant to the video, doesn't matter, because you can see exactly when the rapiers change to closed cycle mode. In just a second, we're going to fire. There we go. We've fired up the nuclear engines because we're very high up in the atmosphere, so the rapiers are no longer providing very much thrust, so we're supplementing that thrust with the nuclear engines. Just watching my surface velocity, it is now starting to decline. I'm trying to hold off firing the rapiers into closed cycle mode for as long as possible because they are far less efficient, but there we go. I guess I was paying attention to the screen in this moment, so I didn't need to rely on that graphical glitch to tell you guys when it switched, but then it's easier for me, because the only indication that they switched is, I guess there's a sound cue, but I've got the game muted for the purposes of recording this audio, and the oxidizer gauge at the top right, which again is very small on my little Vegas Pro preview window, so I don't know, this is just, you're just getting an insight into how the sausage is made, I guess. Anyway, we've depleted our oxidizer supplies. We're truly above any kind of usable air for the rapiers to function in their air-breathing mode, so we're purely using the nuclear engines now to get our way to a stable, low Kerbin orbit, but we have plenty of time to circularize, so shouldn't be a problem. And there we are, look at those, the last of the flames wicking away at the spacecraft. Well, I guess it was an aircraft, now it's a spacecraft. I guess technically it was always both, but whatever. Do I have anything to comment on about the design of this SSTO? Specifically, I'm trying to think, because I didn't really talk about the construction of it during the construction phase of this video, which is great, I know, but, I was introducing the video and setting up the mission, so whatever, I think it's fairly reminiscent of an SSTO. I mean, and I think a lot of people probably relate to this as well, that once you get sort of set in your ways about designing certain spacecraft, it's very hard to then break the mold. Like, the way I would design an SSTO and the way, say, Bradley Wistons would design an SSTO, or how Shadow Zone or Scott Manley would design an SSTO, all probably completely different, and every time we build SSTOs, they would all kind of it's very obvious kind of who built it, I guess, maybe. Not very obvious. But what I'm saying is, everyone probably has their own style, and trying to make something a bit more different from that style can be difficult to break the mold sometimes. That's why I like, this is a good callback to the very beginning of this video, actually. So sometimes I like looking at the Kerbal Space Program Discord while it still exists, and also the Kerbal Space Program subreddit, just looking for kind of cool posts to see what other people did. I've made videos in the past where I've made craft that are very derivative of things I've seen on Reddit, with credit, of course. I'm not gonna plagiarize people there. And at the very beginning of this video, I was building a craft that was very reminiscent of something I saw on the Kerbal Space Program Discord, and I forgot to make a note of this person's username, actually. So I guess I've now gone against my moral stance that I just outlined, where I always try and give credit. But yeah, it was already the focus of this video. If I ever follow through that, I'll do my level best. No, actually, no, do you know what? Now I've dug myself into this hole, I really should now follow through. Where is I'm going to just open Discord on my second monitor. Here we go, KSP screenshots. This is the official Kerbal, the Kerbal Space Center, I think is the name of the Discord server. Basically the one that was set up by Private Division / what was the name of the studio? Intercept Games. Let's have a little look. It's Jack 7900 or 7900 7900, whichever. That was the craft I kind of was looking at when I was designing the vehicle at the very beginning of this video, before a random guy pinged me on Discord. Usually I have Discord notifications turned off. I guess they just turned themselves back on. That's why that happened. It's never happened before, shouldn't happen since. So yeah, just saying, if you see me playing Kerbal Space Program Discord, Your username isn't going to appear in the video if you ping me, I'm afraid. Anyway, all of this, my goodness, was in service of something I was about to say, and then I went on this massive tangent about how we all get kind of stuck in our ways building spacecraft the same way. But this SSTO is very reminiscent of the design of a Gilly SSTO I made 7 years ago. Can you believe it? How does time fly? So, I mean, I don't feel that guilty about it being a very similar design, because 7 years ago, like, my whole viewer base has probably changed several times over at this point. But if you are one of the OGs from 7 years ago, leave a little comment down below. I always like reading my comment section, so you can leave a little comment if you were there all those years ago to see the OG of this spacecraft. But I feel like this spacecraft is better looking in a few ways. I mean, first of all, I'm 7 years more experienced in this game. Maybe 6 years more experienced, given there was that 1 year of KSP2. But, you know, I feel like I've improved my skills with a Z. And, yeah, one thing I really liked about this SSTO is it doesn't follow that convention of having every kind of forward surface being a shock cone, if that makes sense. We've got those kind of really nice aerodynamic sort of tail connectors on the front of those side fuel tanks. Trying to make the thing look a bit more aerodynamic and a bit more kind of unique to kind of my standard look of Mark II fuselage diameter, you know, SSTO designs. So, yeah, my goodness, here we are. I just see that we've arrived at Eve. Apologies, I haven't really gone into very much detail about how we actually get to Gilly, but this isn't really intended to be a tutorial. I mean, these are Blunderbirds videos, which is just a bit of fun. Watch me do a rescue. I have done a couple of Gilly tutorial videos, specifically to kind of go into details of how you actually get to Gilly. The very short version of it is just capture around Eve, so you're just captured, so like your apoapsis is very high, then perform a burn at apoapsis prograde to raise your periapsis to intercept Gilly's orbital line. Then you can do what I'm doing here and just make a maneuver node around that point, and it should basically force a Gilly encounter. And that's kind of how you do the Gilly encounters. But I have done dedicated Gilly tutorials before. Basically one ages ago, like in 2016, and then I did like an updated one in maybe like 2019 or something. Basically, just type into the YouTube search bar low tech to Gilly, Matt Lowne, I guess, and that should then come up. If I remember, there could be a card on screen right now, or there'll be a link in the description. If I remember, hopefully I will, but you know me, guys. It took me like 8 minutes just to explain how I was designed this SSTO to be similar to one I made 7 years ago. So, you know, yeah, my mind, it can wander sometimes, you know. Anyway, as you can see, we have obtained a Gilly encounter. It's going to be a fairly large burn to circularize, which is usually the way. Gilly is kind of a really awkward orbit around Eve. And to basically what you're doing when you're circularizing around an orbiting celestial object, which I guess is all of the objects in Kerbal Space from now think about it, you're essentially just matching your orbit to it. So although Gilly's gravity well is very, very tiny, if you looked at our initial Eve orbit compared to Gilly's orbit, there's going to be a big change for us to do in order to match Gilly's orbit, if that makes sense. That's why it's an expensive burn. But now we're in Gilly orbit, every single burn is going to be of minuscule cost. It's going to take us very, very little fuel to land on Gilly and very, very little fuel to leave Gilly and do all these. So although I'm doing these big, crazy, like normal burns, anti-normal burns, it's all very, very negative, like 4.8 meters per second for this, what is quite a large plane change here. Now, speaking of landing on Gilly, has anyone here landed on Gilly before? Because if you have, you'll probably be aware that it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Not because it's technically challenging, but because Gilly's surface gravity is so low that it's very hard to just like come to a stop. What quite often happens is you end up just sort of touching down on the surface and then just bouncing off or sliding along or rolling and not coming to a complete standstill, which is a shame, because what I want to do is obviously land on Gilly, have my SSTO come to a stop, so then Bob Kerman can leave Random Guy's abandoned vessel and then head on over to a stationary SSTO, get on board nice and safely, we can recover the science and go from there. And so, I've come up with a ingenious way of guaranteeing that we can come to a safe standstill on the surface of Gilly. You might have caught this in the build time-lapse if you're really paying attention, but basically, inside that little cargo bay where the front landing gear is stowed, we also have a hinge piece, attached to which is a telescoping robotic arm, or telescoping piston, sorry. Attached to that is a docking port junior. Now, we're not docking to the stranded spacecraft, which is just there up the hill, as you can see. But what I'm going to do is have Bill Kerman, who is an engineer, jump out, place a ground anchor on the surface of Gilly, anchor it into the surface. We've got a nice static point to which he will weld a octagonal strut, I guess, or a cuboid octagonal strut. Is that what it's called? I don't know, the really tiny cubic piece in the game. And then he's going to weld a docking port to that. Then we can have the SSTO dock to the ground anchored docking port, therefore bringing it to a complete safe anchored standstill on the surface of Gilly. Now, this was kind of easier said than done. The jetpack, or the EVA pack, is very, very essential for kind of easily getting around on the surface of Gilly because its surface gravity is so, low. Kerbals have a hard time walking properly. They end up just sort of tumbling and floating off. But the ground anchor is so heavy that Bill needs to remove his EVA pack in order to place it. So that was kind of a tricky little ordeal. I guess I remember it being a tricky little ordeal. Probably didn't look that bad for you guys watching because I've sped the footage up, but yeah, that was somewhat awkward. Now we have placed the ground anchor and docking port on the surface. We can then begin the process, which I was anticipating to be quite difficult, the process of docking the craft to that docking port, but a little bit of a boop on Bill's head, but then we actually were in the correct position, so it was fine. And there we are, docked to the surface of Gilly. So the spacecraft is not going to float away, or, that's it actually. So now we can actually go to Bob Kerman. After all these years, I don't know how long he's been here. Oh, he's been, I can just see on the top, he's been here 7 years, 10 days in a Mercury capsule. So he's probably not all mentally there at this point, but I see he does have the foresight to run all the science experiments that have been stowing there all those years. I guess his inner scientist never failed, so we can gather that science experiment data just so that, a random guy has something to show for this little mission of his, and then we can, I guess, jetpack him over to the SSTO. I don't know why I always instinctively call it the jetpack, because obviously it's not jets because we're in the vacuum of space, but I feel like jetpack is like the common term for a backpack mounted maneuvering device. I can't remember what the NASA one was called. It was a very literal name for it, wasn't it? Like the Advanced Vacuum Maneuvering Module. I'm not going to Google it, but you guys know what I mean, right? I can't remember the name of it. I thought I would sit here, save a admittedly minuscule amount of Delta B by just removing the unnecessary cargo from the SSTO, that being the additional cubic octagonal struts from the hold, and then we can get Bill Kerman into the SSTO. I'm very disappointed in myself, guys. I can't believe I forgot to plant a flag. That's like, is this the first video I've ever done where I forgot to plant a flag on the celestial body surface that I visited? Disappointed. I'm so disappointed. Make sure you dislike the video, guys. Actually, that won't do anything because dislikes are disabled now. So like the video instead, and that will really help me out regardless. I do use the return YouTube dislike extension, which I know is not hugely accurate because it can't actually access the API, as far as I understand, to see what the true dislike count is for a YouTube video. So I know the exact number of dislikes my videos have because I can still see them, but no one else can, including the return YouTube dislike extension. So what people say is that it's generally pretty accurate because it kind of uses the number of dislikes made by people who have that extension and extrapolates it and does some fancy maths to figure out what the likely counter would be. And I've heard it's generally pretty accurate, but no one really knows. I've often thought about using my position of power here to make a video that encourages, because you guys, I have the best audience ever. Like, my videos always have like 98% likes or more, so I don't really get that many dislikes relative to the number of likes I get. But I've always thought about making a video that might encourage more dislikes than usual, and then be like, aha, I made a really controversial video to make you guys dislike it, just so I could see how accurate the dislike extension is on Chrome. But I don't know what I would make. I could get sponsored by BetterHelp. I'll do that. Thanks, Matt. I won't. People ask me like, oh, have you ever? I made a post on my community tab saying how it feels to have never accepted a sponsorship from Honey, with like the little Giga Chad. And then was like, did you actually ever get approached? And I was never public about this, and now I'm saying this now, no one's going to believe me. But I was always kind of in the same boat as Markiplier, where Honey, I didn't really understand how its business model worked, but I just chalked that up to me just being too stupid to understand. But now, aha, I feel vindicated. And in a similar vein, I have been approached several times actually by BetterHelp. I like work with an agency these days, so it's kind of the agent comes to me, say, we've got BetterHelp working with us. Do you want to accept? And I always say like, no, I'm not willing to say that. And they have said like, oh, BetterHelp's actually been sort of unfairly targeted and it's not as bad as this and that and the other. I'm like, literally, I'm just not willing to touch that, to be honest. And also, like, I work in like the medical field in my real job, so is there a conflict of interest there? Oof, I don't know. And BetterHelp, don't know, it's just one of those companies that don't really... I do actually try and vet my sponsors. I have... people have accused me of having some questionable sponsors in the past, like hover pens, people said were like really like overpriced and all that, but like, yeah, they're just they're an executive toy. Like, I've got fountain pens that I'm a big fountain pen nerd, so I have fountain pens that are more expensive than the hover pens, and the hover pens are great. I love them. They're sitting on my desk right now, and like Mova Globes, yeah, they're expensive, but they are a very niche product, so you're going to be paying niche product prices. I think one of my more controversial... I have actually thought about doing this, you know, guys, making a video saying, do I actually think that YouTube video sponsors are all scams? Because I see a lot of comments on places like Reddit saying, if I see something that's advertised on a YouTube sponsor segment, then it's a scam, I won't touch it. And I'm like, I mean, I use a lot of the products that I've had sponsored. Like, one of the big ones is Manscaped. People say it's overpriced and all that. Like, Manscaped is very expensive, what it is. But I was obviously given all of the Manscaped razors for my sponsorship, and they are really good. Like, they are really good. Yeah, they're expensive, but they are a premium product. You're paying premium prices, and I really like the razors. And what else? What people say is like a bit of a scam. Like VPNs. Like VPNs, they allow you to kind of change your IP in like the eyes of your browser, which is really useful, especially like space news content. Sometimes I'm trying to look at articles and things, but they're locked to the US only. Press a button, now I'm in the US, I can read the article. It's brilliant for things like that. Or like some TV shows like Taskmaster New Zealand. It's not available in the UK, but it is available if I change my location to New Zealand. So yeah, I use my VPN sponsors all the time, like the product that I was given for the VPN sponsors. I use that. I think one of the more controversial ones I did not that long ago, or like 2023, was I got sponsored by Fume, which people accused me was like a vape. And Fume is, I was really on board with their like mission statement. It's basically something designed to, so I'm picking my words carefully. I'm now going to give you guys a bit of insight actually into how these sponsors work. So basically, YouTubers get given a contract, and it's got all of the talking points in it saying, we want you to say this, this, and this, but there's also talking points they do not want you to say. So certain phrases, like for example, when I was sponsored by Mova Globes, I was strictly told to never say the globes float or levitate or anything like that, because they don't, it just looks like they do. But they didn't want you to use those specific words. And Fume said they don't want you to use the words vape or vaping or smoke or smoking or anything like that. But Fume's big thing is that it helps you quit smoking. So I was having to say like, oh, it's really good, like it lets you breathe flavored air and stuff. But really, I think at its core, like from what people have said, it really helped them quit smoking. So I'm like, this is a really good product for like making, like helping people change, make healthy lifestyle changes. But because I wasn't allowed to say anything to do with smoking, I had to sort of say, oh, you know, it helps with concentration. And then obviously then it just sounds like a vape. And then, you know, the controversies kind of ensued. So I was kind of annoyed that I wasn't allowed to say the word smoking in that ad, to say, hey, are you trying to quit smoking? Then, you know, use this. I don't know. I probably won't accept a Fume sponsorship again, because I don't really want to bring the controversy back to me again. But yeah, just a little bit of an insight there. And I guess, you know, me now sitting here saying, please, guys, my sponsors aren't scams, please. It's going to get the dislikes that I wanted in the beginning, and then I can verify whether or not the return dislike Chrome extension actually does anything. So, as we arrive back at Kerbin, what have we learned on this journey? I've learned to maybe stop digging holes for myself. But, you know, well, you live and learn. Oop, got a bit tappy with the time warp just there, and yeah, we hit the atmosphere before I retracted my solar panels, but luckily I was fast enough in retracting them that we didn't end up losing them. So SSTO missions, well, particularly interplanetary SSTO missions, one of the things you need to worry about is making sure you don't overheat when you re-enter at Kerbin. But luckily, Eve is close enough to Kerbin that, you know, the re-entry speed isn't too high, so I wasn't overly worried about overheating and exploding. I was very carefully looking at my air brakes though, because the air brakes are, and those are those like sticky outy bits on those outer Rapier engines, designed to obviously, they're creating a lot more drag so we slow down faster. They're notorious for having terrible heat resilience, and they always overheat and explode. They're always the first pieces to, you know, have a temperature gauge show up and then they blow up. But here, they were fine. Maybe it's because we're really high up in the atmosphere, but I was really watching those air brakes, and I was really surprised that we didn't even get a temperature gauge show up for them. So not quite sure what happened there. Maybe there was a buff in one of the later versions of KSP1 that I just don't remember now. But yeah, I was kind of surprised the air brakes held up as well as they did. Now our apoapsis is fairly low. We're actually going to circularize. We've got quite a bit of delta V left for what we need to do now. Just shy of 300 meters per second. So all we're going to do is circularize. Then that's going to make things much, much easier when it comes to getting back to the Kerbal Space Center's runway. We might have been able to do it just using air brakes. I was being a bit more careful, like I would have not had my apoapsis quite so low, and then we probably would have been re-entering again with enough speed to make it all the way back to the Kerbal Space Center Peninsula. But, we had the fuel budget to do it this way, so that's why I did it this way. So we've obviously entered a stable Kerbin orbit. Now I'm going to create a maneuver node to plan our deorbit burn, and actually this time I got it. I nailed it first time. Yes! I always recommend making a quick save kind of before and after you do your deorbit burns, that if you kind of undershoot or overshoot the KSC, you can just reload that save and have another go, depending on whether, adjusting it, depending on whether or not you undershot or overshot the Kerbal Space Center. But this time, I just sort of guesstimated it, and we ended up getting back to the Kerbal Space Center on my first attempt, which isn't actually all that uncommon for me, just because I've done this so many times. But yeah, if you're kind of not as experienced with this, then something to bear in mind. We have a slightly awkward trajectory. We're not coming in from an equatorial orbit, we're coming from a slightly inclined orbit. So I've activated the air breathing mode. Well, I've activated the Rapier engines and made sure they're in their air breathing mode, just in case we undershoot or overshoot. We can sort of use those engines to fly back, but didn't actually need them in the end. So I probably could have flexed a bit and not activated them at all. But I don't know. What can I say? What can I say? I'm honest with you guys. And there are the mountains that are, just behind the Kerbal Space Center's runway, and then you can kind of see where the ground is slightly lighter on the coast there. That marks the peninsula on which the Kerbal Space Center's runway sits. And we're coming in at a nice trajectory, about 600, just over 600 meters per second. So we've easily got enough speed to carry us there with only gliding. And yeah, so that's pretty much the end of the mission. I have already sent a random guy the save file so he can recover the vessel and reap those science rewards. I never actually recovered it myself, so sorry guys, I don't actually know how much science we earned from it. I didn't maximize our science output for what it's worth. Like, I could have run the experiments, but I could have brought science experiments on board the SSTO itself, so we could have run the experiments from interplanetary space, space near Eve, space high above Eve, etc, etc. But, this was all about rescuing the mission. Now that a random guy has his scientist, or his premier scientist back, he could go ahead and do those missions himself. Maybe he could even use the SSTO that's now on his runway to kind of do it. But that's not a mission for me or a decision to be made by me. That's for a random guy. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video, everyone. I certainly had a lot of fun. I do truly believe that Gilly is one of the most underrated places to visit in Kerbal's space program. And massive thank you if your name is on the right-hand side there. It's your support that makes all of this content possible. So sincere thanks if you are there. But that's the end of the video, guys. So goodbye.